I discovered my identity had been stolen when the bank called to inform me that my mortgage payment was 67 days overdue, which was impossible because I had automatic payments set up and never missed one in the 3 years I'd lived at 842 Oakmont Drive in Phoenix, Arizona. Mr. B, according to our records, we've been sending notices to your address for 2 months now, the bank representative said with barely concealed irritation. You haven't responded to any of our letters, emails, or phone calls. What phone calls? I asked, sitting up straighter in my desk chair. I never received any emails or letters either, and I definitely didn't get any phone calls from you. There was a pause. Are you currently residing at 1156 Willow Creek Lane, Phoenix, Arizona? My blood ran cold. No, I live at 842 Oakmont Drive. I've lived there for 3 years. What are you talking about? The representative's tone shifted from annoyed to confused. Sir, our system shows that your mailing address was changed on November 15th. We've been sending everything to Willow Creek Lane since then. I never changed my address. I never authorized that. Let me pull up the change request. One moment. I could hear typing in the background. The change was submitted by... It says here it was submitted by the Oakmont Hills Homeowners Association. They provided documentation stating you had moved. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. They did what? That conversation happened on May 2nd, and it was only the beginning of the nightmare I would uncover over the next several weeks. My name is Quinton B, and I'm a 34-year-old civil engineer who bought a modest 3-bedroom house in the Oakmont Hills subdivision 3 years ago. The neighborhood was nice enough, with well-maintained homes and tree-lined streets, but the HOA had always been a minor annoyance. They sent passive-aggressive letters about trash cans being visible from the street for more than 4 hours after pickup, and once fined me $50 because my lawn was a 1/4 inch too long during a particularly rainy April when I couldn't mow for a week. But this was different. This was fraud. This was identity theft. This was a federal crime. After I hung up with the bank, I immediately started digging through my recent mail. I realized with growing horror that I hadn't received much of anything lately. No credit card statements, no utility bills, no junk mail. I'd been so busy with a major project at work that I hadn't really noticed. My bills were mostly on auto pay, and I handled everything else electronically. But now that I thought about it, my mailbox had been eerily empty for months. I called my credit card company next. Same story. Address changed to 1156 Willow Creek Lane on November 16th. Then I called my car insurance company. November 17th, my health insurance. November 18th. Every single one of my accounts had been systematically changed to this address I'd never heard of, and every single change had allegedly been authorized by the Oakmont Hills HOA. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the neighborhood's main entrance. The office was only open 3 days a week, and fortunately, Thursday was one of them. I parked haphazardly and stormed inside. Behind the desk sat Brenda Patterson, the HOA president and the bane of my existence for the past 3 years. Brenda was a woman in her early 50s with short blonde hair that she kept aggressively styled, and she wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. She looked up from her computer with the expression of someone who'd just smelled something unpleasant. "Mr. B," she said flatly, "how can I help you today?" "You can explain to me why the HOA changed my mailing address without my permission," I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building inside me. Brenda blinked slowly, like a lizard. "I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. In November, someone from this office contacted my bank, my credit card companies, my insurance companies, and God knows who else, claiming that I'd moved to 1156 Willow Creek Lane. I never moved. I never authorized any address change. That's mail fraud, Brenda. That's a federal crime." Her expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or guilt. "I'll need to look into our records. We don't typically handle address changes for residents." "Well, you did for me. Multiple times, across multiple accounts, starting in mid-November, so I need to see those records, and I need to know who authorized this." Brenda stood up, smoothing down her floral print blouse. "I'll have to check with our board members and our attorney before I can release any information." This is a serious accusation, Mr. B, and I won't have you coming in here making threats. I'm not making threats. I'm stating facts. And if you don't provide me with answers, I'll be contacting law enforcement and the postal inspector's office because mail fraud is their jurisdiction. You do what you feel you need to do, Brenda said coolly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. I left the office shaking with anger. Back at home, I spent the next 4 hours on the phone trying to change my address back with every company I could think of. The process was infuriating. Most required me to verify information that I couldn't access because I hadn't received statements in 6 months. I had to answer security questions about transactions I couldn't remember. 3 accounts had been locked due to returned mail. My credit card company informed me that I'd missed 2 payments because the bills had gone to the wrong address and my credit score had dropped 90 points. As I worked through the list, a more terrifying picture emerged. I wasn't just dealing with inconvenience. My driver's license address had been changed. My voter registration had been changed. My car registration had been changed. Someone had filed change of address forms with virtually every agency and institution connected to my life. That evening, I drove to 1156 Willow Creek Lane. I needed to see this place for myself. The address turned out to be in a completely different subdivision about 4 miles away, a newer development with smaller lots and cookie-cutter houses. Number 1156 was a beige stucco 2-story with a for rent sign in the yard. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I peered through the windows and saw empty rooms. I called the property management number on the sign. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. "Hi, I'm calling about 1156 Willow Creek Lane," I said. "Has anyone been renting that property recently?" "That unit has been vacant since October," the woman said. "Are you interested in viewing it?" "Did anyone have mail delivered there? Maybe forwarded there?" "I wouldn't know about that, sir. We just manage the rental. You'd have to ask the postal service." I thanked her and hung up. So the house was empty. Someone had deliberately chosen an empty house to send my mail to. But why? What was the point? The next morning, I took a half-day off work and went to the post office. I explained my situation to 3 different people before finally getting to speak with a supervisor named Martin Reyes. "So you're saying someone filed fraudulent change of address forms?" Martin asked, pulling up something on his computer. "Yes, multiple forms apparently. My mail has been going to an address where I don't live for the past 6 months. Martin typed for a while, frowning at his screen. "I'm seeing a forward order that was filed on November 14th. It shows your mail from 842 Oakmont Drive being forwarded to 1156 Willow Creek Lane. The request appears to have been filed online." "I didn't file it. Someone else did." "Do you have any proof?" "Do I have proof that I didn't file something? How do I prove a negative? I live at my house. I've always lived at my house. I never moved. Someone filed this fraudulently." Martin scratched his chin. "This is a federal crime, Mr. B. Mail fraud, identity theft, postal fraud. You need to file a report with the postal inspector's office." "How do I do that?" He wrote down a phone number and a website. "Call them, file a complaint, they'll investigate. In the meantime, I can cancel the forward order and put a hold on that address so nothing else gets redirected. But I can't retrieve any mail that's already been delivered to the other location." "What happens to mail delivered to a vacant house?" "If it's not picked up, it eventually gets returned to sender or goes to the dead letter office, depending on the class of mail. But if someone's been collecting it," he trailed off, the implication hanging in the air. "Someone had been collecting my mail. Someone had access to my personal information, my financial statements, my credit cards, everything. For 6 months. I left the post office and immediately called the number Martin had given me. I spent 45 minutes navigating an automated system before finally reaching a human being at the United States Postal Inspection Service. I explained everything again to a woman named Inspector Rachel Morrison. "I'm going to open a case file," Inspector Morrison said. "This is definitely mail fraud and possibly identity theft. Have you noticed any suspicious activity on your accounts? Fraudulent charges? Open credit lines? Anything like that?" "I just found out about this yesterday. I haven't had time to check everything yet." "You need to do that immediately. Pull your credit reports from all 3 bureaus. Check for any accounts you didn't open. File a police report with your local department. Document everything. I'm going to assign an investigator and someone will contact you within a week." After hanging up, I drove to the Phoenix Police Department and filed a report. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic, but didn't seem particularly urgent about the situation. "The postal inspectors will handle most of this," Officer Daniels said. "Since it's mail fraud, it's their jurisdiction. But we'll keep the report on file in case you need it for your financial institutions." Back at home, I spent the rest of the day pulling credit reports and reviewing every account I had. My heart nearly stopped when I saw 3 credit cards I'd never opened. 2 from department stores, 1 from a gas station chain. All 3 had been opened in December with the Willow Creek Lane address. The balances totaled over $12,000. I called each company immediately and reported the fraud. The process was exhausting and repetitive. Yes, these accounts were fraudulent. No, I didn't open them. No, I didn't make these charges. Yes, I'd filed a police report. Yes, I'd contacted the postal inspector. Each company wanted copies of documentation I was still trying to gather. By the evening, I was mentally drained and furious. Someone at the HOA had done this. It had to be Brenda or someone working with her. But why? What possible motive could she have? I called my neighbor, Dave Morrison, who'd lived in the neighborhood for over a decade. Dave was retired military, a straight shooting guy who'd always been friendly without getting too involved in neighborhood politics. "Dave, have you had any problems with the HOA lately?" I asked. "Define problems," Dave said with a dry laugh. "Brenda's always got something up her butt. Why?" I explained what had happened. Dave was silent for a long moment. "That's insane," he finally said. "I mean, Brenda's a control freak, but fraud? Identity theft? That's next level. Has she done anything weird with other residents? Changed anything without permission?" "Well, there was that thing with the Johnsons last year. You remember them? They lived over on Maple Court?" "Vaguely. They got into it with the HOA over some dispute about their fence. Brenda kept fining them, and they kept refusing to pay. Eventually, they got so many fines that the HOA put a lien on their house. They ended up selling and moving out. But I don't know details beyond that." A lien. That caught my attention. I thanked Dave and started researching HOA liens. What I learned made my stomach turn. HOAs had tremendous power. They could fine homeowners, place liens on properties, and even force foreclosures for unpaid dues or violations. In Arizona, HOAs could foreclose without judicial oversight in some cases. It was a system ripe for abuse. I pulled out my HOA documents, all the paperwork I'd signed when I bought the house. Buried in the covenants and restrictions was a clause stating that the HOA had the right to contact owners at any valid address and that owners were responsible for keeping their contact information current. Another clause stated that repeated violations or unpaid fines could result in liens and potential foreclosure proceedings. A theory started forming in my mind, dark and disturbing. What if Brenda had changed my address deliberately to prevent me from receiving violation notices or fine notifications? What if she was stacking up violations and fines without my knowledge, building toward a lien and potential foreclosure? But that seemed almost too elaborate, too risky. And it didn't explain the credit cards. Over the weekend, I became obsessed with understanding what had happened. I filed a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I reported the identity theft to the Federal Trade Commission. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus. I changed passwords on every online account I had. I signed up for credit monitoring services. On Monday, I took another day off work and went back to the HOA office. This time, Brenda wasn't there. Instead, there was a younger woman I'd never seen before sitting at the desk. "Is Brenda Patterson available?" I asked. "Mrs. Patterson is out of the office today," the woman said. "I'm Stephanie, the assistant manager. Can I help you with something?" "I need to see HOA records related to my property and any correspondence the HOA has had with financial institutions or government agencies on my behalf." Stephanie looked uncomfortable. "I'll need to check with Mrs. Patterson about what records you're entitled to see. Arizona law gives me the right to inspect HOA records related to my property," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "I'm requesting those records now. Let me make a call." Stephanie picked up the phone and dialed. She spoke quietly for a few minutes, then hung up. "Mrs. Patterson said she'll be in tomorrow morning at 9. She'll meet with you then." I didn't trust that Brenda would actually be there, but I agreed. As I turned to leave, I noticed a filing cabinet in the corner with a label that said, "Resident Files AD." My last name started with B. On impulse, I walked over to it. "I'm sorry, sir. You can't access those files," Stephanie said, standing up quickly. "These are resident files. I'm a resident. I have a right to see my own file. I really need you to wait until tomorrow when Mrs. Patterson is here." The fact that she was so nervous about it made me even more suspicious. I left the office but sat in my car in the parking lot for a while, thinking. Something was very wrong here, something bigger than just changing my address. I could feel it. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Mr. B, this is Special Agent Thomas Reeves from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. Inspector Morrison assigned me to your case. Do you have time to talk?" Relief washed over me. "Yes, absolutely. I've reviewed your complaint and the documentation you submitted. This is definitely a concerning case. I'd like to meet with you in person, go over the timeline, and see all the evidence you've gathered. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? We set up a meeting for Tuesday at 2 o'clock at a coffee shop near my house." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the credit cards, the changed addresses, the empty house on Willow Creek Lane. Someone had orchestrated all of this carefully. Someone with access to personal information and the ability to convincingly impersonate the HOA. Tuesday morning at 9, I showed up at the HOA office. Brenda was there, as promised, but she wasn't alone. A man in a suit sat in one of the chairs near her desk. "Mr. B, this is Gregory Hunt, the HOA's attorney," Brenda said. "I asked him to be present for this meeting." "Fine by me," I said. "I want answers, and I want to see records." Gregory Hunt stood and extended his hand. I shook it reluctantly. "Mr. B, I understand you have some concerns about administrative actions taken by the HOA. I want to assure you that the Oakmont Hills HOA operates in full compliance with Arizona law." "Then you can explain why the HOA fraudulently changed my mailing address with multiple financial institutions and government agencies without my knowledge or consent." Hunt's expression didn't waver. "The HOA has no record of taking any such actions. Mrs. Patterson has thoroughly reviewed the files, and there's no documentation of any address changes being filed on your behalf." "That's impossible. Every single institution told me the change request came from the HOA. They have documentation." "I'd like to see that documentation," Hunt said smoothly. I pulled out my phone and started showing him the notes I'd taken during my calls, including the dates and reference numbers. The bank said the change was submitted by the Oakmont Hills Homeowners Association on November 15th. My credit card company said November 16th. My insurance companies, November 17th and 18th. Someone claiming to represent this HOA contacted all these places. Brenda spoke up. "Mr. B, I think you may be the victim of some kind of scam, but I can assure you it wasn't anyone from this office. We don't handle resident mail or address changes. That's not our function." "Then who did it? Who has access to HOA letterhead, to my personal information, to enough details to convincingly impersonate the HOA?" Hunt interjected. "That's something you'll need to investigate with law enforcement. The HOA is not responsible for external fraud committed using our name." I felt my face flush with anger. "I want to see my resident file. I want copies of all correspondence between the HOA and me, all violation notices, all fines, everything." Hunt nodded to Brenda, who reluctantly pulled a file folder from a cabinet. It was surprisingly thin. She made copies of the contents while I waited, the photocopier humming in the tense silence. When she handed me the copies, I flipped through them immediately. There were the usual notices about trash cans and lawn length, all dated from my first 2 years in the house. Then, nothing. No correspondence at all after September of last year. "Where are the violation notices from the past 8 months?" I asked. "There haven't been any," Brenda said. "Your property has been in compliance." That was odd. Brenda usually found something to complain about. I'd gotten used to receiving at least one notice every couple of months. "I want to see the HOA's correspondence logs, all outgoing letters, all phone calls made on behalf of the organization, especially anything in November." Hunt shook his head. "Those are internal administrative records. They're not subject to homeowner inspection under Arizona law." Actually, they are, I said. Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 33-1805 gives me the right to inspect HOA records, including financial records and board meeting minutes. If the HOA made official communications on my behalf, those would be recorded. Hunt's jaw tightened slightly. I'll review the statute and determine what records you're entitled to access. In the meantime, this meeting is over. If you continue to harass Mrs. Patterson or make unfounded accusations against the HOA, we'll consider that defamation and pursue appropriate legal remedies. I stood up, gathering my copies. You do that. And you should know that I've filed complaints with the Postal Inspector's Office, the FTC, and the CFPB. Federal investigators are already involved. So if anyone in this organization has done anything illegal, they're going to find out. As I left the office, I felt Brenda's eyes boring into my back. Something about her expression had shifted when I mentioned the federal investigators. She was worried. Good. My meeting with Special Agent Reeves that afternoon was far more productive. He was a man in his mid-40s with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. I showed him everything, the phone call logs, the credit reports with the fraudulent accounts, my notes from the post office, the HOA file copies, the photos I'd taken of the vacant house on Willow Creek Lane. This is extensive, Reeves said, spreading the documents across the coffee shop table. Whoever did this had significant access to your personal information. Tell me about your relationship with the HOA, and specifically with Brenda Patterson. I explained the history of petty violations and fines, the general antagonism, the fact that Brenda seemed to single out certain homeowners for extra scrutiny. Has she ever asked you for personal information beyond what the HOA would normally have access to? Reeves asked. I thought about it. When I moved in, I had to fill out contact information forms. Name, phone, email, emergency contact. Pretty basic stuff. But now that you mention it, there was a survey that went around last year, supposedly to update resident records. It asked for a lot of information. Employer, income range, banking institution, vehicle information. I didn't fill it out because it seemed invasive. Do you still have a copy of that survey? Maybe in my email. I can check. Reeves made a note. I want you to send me that if you find it. I'm also going to need you to compile a list of every financial institution and agency where your address was changed. I'll subpoena their records directly to get copies of the actual change requests that were submitted. Those documents might have IP addresses, electronic signatures, or other identifying information. Do you think it was Brenda? I asked. Sure. I don't speculate until I have evidence, Reeves said. But I will tell you that HOA fraud is more common than people realize. HOA board members have access to homeowner information and a certain amount of authority. Some abuse that authority. The fact that your address was changed to a vacant property is particularly concerning because it suggests the goal was to intercept your mail, not just redirect it randomly. But why? What would someone gain from intercepting my mail? Access to your financial information, account numbers, credit cards. Identity theft is lucrative, or it could be part of a larger scheme related to your property specifically. Have you checked with the county recorder's office to make sure there haven't been any liens or encumbrances placed on your house? My stomach dropped. I hadn't thought of that. No, should I? Yes, tomorrow. Make sure no one has filed anything against your property. We talked for another hour. Reeves explained that mail fraud investigations could take months because they often involved multiple victims and complex paper trails. He asked me to be patient but thorough in documenting everything. Wednesday morning, I went to the Maricopa County Recorder's office. I requested a title search on my property. The clerk processed the request and handed me a printout 20 minutes later. There it was. A lien filed by the Oakmont Hills Homeowners Association on April 8th for unpaid fines and dues totaling $8,500. I stared at the document in disbelief. $8,000 in fines? For what? I'd never received any notice of fines. I'd never been given an opportunity to dispute anything or pay anything. The lien document referenced multiple violations dating from November through March, failure to maintain property appearance, unauthorized modifications, repeated parking violations, trash receptacle violations, and missed mandatory HOA meetings. Each violation carried escalating fines, starting at $100 and increasing for each subsequent offense. This was it. This was the scheme. Brenda had changed my address so I wouldn't receive the violation notices. She'd then stacked up violations and fines, knowing I couldn't respond or dispute them. And now there was a lien on my house. If I didn't pay the $8,000 plus legal fees and interest, the HOA could eventually foreclose. I took pictures of everything and immediately called Special Agent Reeves. "They put a lien on my house," I said as soon as he answered. $8,000 in fines for violations I never knew about because my mail was being sent to the wrong address. "Send me copies of those documents right now," Reeves said. "This changes things. This isn't just identity theft for financial gain. This is conspiracy and fraud related to real property. I need to bring in more people." "What do I do about the lien?" "Don't pay it. Not yet. If you pay it, you're acknowledging the debt is valid. We need to gather evidence first. In the meantime, I'm going to accelerate this investigation. I'm also going to recommend you get an attorney who specializes in HOA law." I left the recorder's office in a daze. This was so much worse than I'd imagined. Brenda had tried to steal my house. I spent that afternoon calling real estate attorneys. The third one I spoke with, Margaret Chen, specialized in HOA disputes. I explained the situation, and she agreed to meet with me the next day. Thursday morning, I sat in Margaret Chen's office overlooking downtown Phoenix. She was a sharp woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an intensity that immediately made me feel like I'd made the right choice. "This is one of the most egregious cases of HOA abuse I've seen in 30 years of practice," Margaret said after reviewing my documents. "The deliberate interception of mail to prevent you from receiving legal notice is fraud. The lien based on those fraudulent violations is invalid. And if we can prove that Brenda Patterson orchestrated this, she's facing serious criminal charges." "Can they foreclose on my house?" "Not if we act quickly. We're going to file an emergency motion to invalidate the lien and prevent any foreclosure proceedings. We'll also send a formal demand letter to the HOA board, putting them on notice that their president has engaged in criminal fraud. And we're going to file a civil lawsuit for damages. You've suffered financial harm from the credit cards that were opened, the damage to your credit score, the emotional distress, and the legal fees you're now incurring." "How much is this going to cost me?" "My retainer is $5,000, but I believe we can recover that and much more from the HOA and from Brenda Patterson personally. What she did goes beyond her authority as HOA president, which means she's personally liable." I wrote the check, money I couldn't really afford given the mess my finances were in. But I didn't have a choice. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved quickly. Margaret filed the emergency motion, and we got a hearing scheduled in front of a judge for mid-June. She also sent the demand letter to the HOA board, and I learned that several board members had no idea what Brenda had been doing. 2 of them resigned immediately. A third called me personally to apologize and say he'd be supporting the removal of Brenda as president. Special Agent Reeves contacted me with updates. He'd subpoenaed records from my bank and credit card companies. The address change requests had all been submitted electronically, and the IP addresses traced back to a computer at the HOA office. He'd also obtained the fraudulent credit card statements and discovered that most of the charges were for home improvement stores and online retailers. "We're building a strong case," Reeves told me during one of our phone calls, "but I need you to be prepared for this to take time. We're coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office because we're looking at multiple federal charges: mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, computer fraud. If we can tie all the evidence together, this could result in significant prison time." "What about the person collecting mail from Willow Creek Lane? Have you figured out who that was?" "We're working on it. We've interviewed the property management company and the homeowner. No one had permission to access that mailbox. We're pulling security footage from neighbors to see if we can identify who was taking mail from the property." I felt vindicated, but also exhausted. The constant stress was taking a toll. I'd lost weight, wasn't sleeping well, and had trouble focusing at work. My boss was understanding but clearly concerned about my distraction on the project. In late May, things came to a head. I got a call from Dave Morrison, my neighbor. "Quinton, you need to get over here," Dave said urgently. "Brenda's at the HOA office right now loading boxes into her car. It looks like she's clearing out." I drove to the HOA office immediately. Sure enough, Brenda's silver Mercedes was parked outside, and through the window, I could see her carrying boxes. I called Special Agent Reeves. "Don't confront her," Reeves said. "Just watch and document. I'm sending someone over right now." I took video on my phone of Brenda loading box after box into her car. She made 4 trips, and the boxes looked heavy, like they were filled with files. When she came out with the 5th box, she saw me standing there. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she quickly put the box in her car, got in, and drove away. 20 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up, and Special Agent Reeves got out along with another agent and 2 Phoenix police officers. "Is she gone?" Reeves asked. "She left about 15 minutes ago. She took at least 5 boxes of what looked like files." "That's destruction of evidence or obstruction if those were HOA records," Reeves said grimly. "We're executing a search warrant on the office right now. We were going to do it tomorrow, but we're moving it up." I watched as the agents entered the building. Stephanie, the assistant manager, came out looking terrified. The police took a statement from her while the agents worked inside. 2 hours later, Reeves came out carrying several boxes of his own, now with evidence labels on them. "We've got computer hard drives, file records, bank statements for the HOA, all kinds of documentation," he told me. "Whatever Brenda took, she didn't get everything. We're also executing a search warrant on her home right now." "Is she going to be arrested?" "Soon. We're coordinating with the U.S. attorney, probably within the next couple of days." I went home that night feeling like things were finally moving in the right direction, but I couldn't shake the image of Brenda's face when she saw me watching her load those boxes. There had been something desperate in her expression, something cornered and dangerous. The next morning, I got a call from Margaret Chen. "We got the hearing moved up. The judge wants to see us tomorrow morning. Apparently, the prosecutor's office contacted the court about the ongoing criminal investigation, and the judge wants to address the lien issue before the criminal case proceeds." The hearing was held in a Maricopa County courtroom on May 21st. I sat at a table with Margaret while the HOA's attorney, Gregory Hunt, sat alone at the opposing table. Brenda was notably absent. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge Patricia Valdez, reviewed the filings and then looked at Hunt. "Mr. Hunt, where is your client? I would expect the HOA president to be present for a hearing regarding a lien filed by the HOA." Hunt stood. "Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson has declined to attend this hearing on advice of counsel in the related criminal matter." "I see. And is the HOA board aware of the allegations in this case?" "The board has been made aware, Your Honor. They've retained me to represent the organization's interests, which are separate from Mrs. Patterson's personal interests." Judge Valdez turned to Margaret. "Ms. Chen, lay out your case for me." Margaret stood and presented the evidence. The fraudulent address changes, the intercepted mail, the violations and fines that I never received notice of, the lien that resulted from those fines. She showed the IP address evidence that traced back to the HOA office, the timeline that demonstrated the deliberate nature of the scheme, and the federal investigation that was ongoing. Your Honor, this is a clear case of fraud perpetrated by an HOA officer who abused her position of authority to target a homeowner, Margaret concluded. The lien is invalid because Mr. B was never provided proper notice of the violations or an opportunity to cure them. The address change was deliberate and fraudulent, designed specifically to prevent him from receiving that notice. We're asking the court to invalidate the lien, order the HOA to remove it from the property records, and award attorney's fees and damages to my client. Judge Valdez looked at Hunt. Counselor, what's your response? Hunt stood slowly. Your Honor, the HOA board has reviewed this matter carefully. While we are not in a position to admit criminal wrongdoing, the board recognizes that there appear to be serious irregularities in how this case was handled. The board has voted to remove Mrs. Patterson as president, effective immediately. The board also votes to withdraw the lien and dismiss all outstanding fines against Mr. B's property. I felt a surge of relief, but Margaret didn't look satisfied. Your Honor, that's not sufficient, she said. Mr. B has suffered significant damages. His credit was ruined. Fraudulent accounts were opened in his name. He's incurred thousands of dollars in legal fees and time away from work. He's suffered emotional distress and anxiety. We're seeking compensatory damages of $50,000 plus attorney's fees. Judge Valdez nodded. I'm going to order the lien removed immediately. As for damages, that's going to be part of a separate proceeding. Ms. Chen, you'll need to file a formal complaint for damages. But given what I've seen here, I'm strongly encouraging the HOA to settle this matter. Mr. Hunt, I suggest you advise your client that this court does not look kindly on fraud, and if this goes to trial, the damages could be far more substantial. Understood, Your Honor. The judge signed the order removing the lien, and we left the courtroom victorious. Outside, Margaret shook my hand. This is a good outcome, she said, but we're not done. I'll file the civil complaint this week. With the criminal investigation backing us up, I expect the HOA will want to settle rather than go through a trial. That afternoon, I got a call from Special Agent Reeves. Brenda Patterson was arrested an hour ago, he said. We executed an arrest warrant at her home. She's being charged with mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The U.S. Attorney is also considering charges related to interstate fraud, because some of the credit cards had out-of-state billing addresses. What happens now? She'll have an initial appearance before a magistrate judge, probably tomorrow. They'll set bail conditions. Then the case will proceed through the federal system. Discovery, motions, potentially a trial, though most of these cases end in plea bargains. But I want you to know that we found a lot of evidence at her house, more files, a laptop with detailed records of multiple homeowners, not just you. We think you might not be the only victim. That stopped me cold. What do you mean? We're going through the records now, but it looks like Brenda may have been running this scheme on other homeowners in the subdivision. We found files on at least 4 other properties with similar patterns, address changes, violation notices, liens. We're reaching out to those homeowners now. I felt sick. How many people had Brenda victimized? How many lives had she disrupted? Over the next week, the story broke in the local news. HOA president arrested for mail fraud and identity theft ran as a headline in the Arizona Republic. The story detailed the scheme and mentioned that federal investigators believed there might be multiple victims. I got calls from 3 other homeowners in Oakmont Hills, all wanting to compare notes. Jerry and Linda Patterson, no relation to Brenda, had experienced similar issues 2 years ago but hadn't connected it to the HOA. They'd eventually paid a lien to avoid foreclosure, never knowing it was fraudulent. Robert Torres had gotten into a dispute with Brenda over a fence and suddenly found himself facing $8,000 in fines. He'd hired an attorney and fought it, eventually settling for $3,000. And Michelle Brennan had actually lost her house. The HOA had foreclosed on her property over unpaid fines, and she'd been evicted. She'd assumed it was legitimate, that she'd somehow missed the notices. I put all of them in touch with Special Agent Reeves. The case was growing larger. In mid-June, Brenda Patterson appeared in federal court for her arraignment. I attended with Margaret Chen. Brenda looked smaller somehow, diminished. She pleaded not guilty, and the judge set bail at $100,000, with conditions including surrender of her passport and GPS monitoring. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave a brief statement describing what had happened to me and urging other potential victims to come forward. This wasn't just about me, I said into the cameras. This was a systematic scheme to defraud homeowners, to steal their property using the authority of the HOA as a cover. No one should have to go through what I went through, wondering if they're going to lose their home because of someone else's criminal actions. That night, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a DC area code. Mr. B, this is Congressman David Hartley's office. The congressman has been following your case in the news. He chairs the House Subcommittee on Consumer Protection, and he's very interested in using your experience as part of a larger investigation into HOA abuses. Would you be willing to testify before Congress? I sat down heavily on my couch. Testify before Congress? Yes, sir. The congressman believes there's a need for stronger federal oversight of HOAs and better protection for homeowners. Your case illustrates the potential for abuse very clearly. Would you be willing to come to Washington and share your story? Yes, I said. Absolutely yes. In July, I flew to Washington, D.C. I'd never been to the Capitol before, and the grandeur of it was overwhelming. I was nervous as I sat in the hearing room, waiting to be called to testify. The room was smaller than I'd imagined from watching hearings on TV, but it was still imposing with its wood paneling and formal atmosphere. When it was my turn, I walked to the witness table and was sworn in. I told my story to the assembled congressmen and women, explaining how my life had been upended by an HOA president who abused her authority. I described the months of uncertainty, the damage to my credit, the threat of losing my home. I talked about the other victims we'd discovered. HOAs are supposed to protect property values and maintain neighborhoods, I said. But when they're given too much power without adequate oversight, they become instruments of oppression and fraud. No homeowner should have to face what I faced. No one should have to hire lawyers and call federal investigators just to keep their home safe from their own HOA. The committee members asked questions, and I answered as honestly as I could. When it was over, several of them came down to shake my hand and thank me for my courage in speaking out. Back in Phoenix, the legal proceedings continued. The civil case against the HOA moved forward, and in August, we reached a settlement. The HOA agreed to pay me $75,000 in damages, including all my legal fees. The settlement also required the HOA to implement new oversight procedures and mandatory training for board members about their legal obligations. The criminal case took longer. Brenda Patterson's attorney filed multiple motions trying to suppress evidence or get charges dismissed. But in October, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy trial, Brenda accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to mail fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for December. I attended the sentencing hearing with a victim impact statement prepared. The courtroom was fuller than I expected. Jerry, Linda, Robert, and Michelle were all there, along with two other victims who'd come forward during the investigation. The prosecutor asked each of us to speak. I went first. Your Honor, what Brenda Patterson did to me wasn't just a crime on paper. She stole 6 months of my life. She invaded my privacy, accessed my financial information, and threatened my home. I spent months in constant stress and anxiety, not knowing if I'd lose everything I'd worked for. I had to take time off work, spend thousands of dollars on lawyers, and rebuild my credit from scratch. The emotional toll was immense. I still check my mailbox every day with a sense of dread, wondering if something else has gone wrong. I still monitor my credit obsessively. She took away my sense of security, and that's something no amount of money can restore. The other victims spoke, their stories echoing mine. Michelle Brennan, the woman who'd lost her house, was particularly emotional. I was homeless for 3 months because of her, Michelle said, her voice breaking. I lost my home, my belongings, my dignity. I didn't understand what had happened or why. I thought I'd failed somehow. It wasn't until Mr. B's case made the news that I realized I'd been the victim of a crime. She destroyed my life, and I wanted to face real consequences. When we were done, the prosecutor presented the case for sentencing. Your Honor, Ms. Patterson engaged in a sophisticated, systematic scheme to defraud at least 6 homeowners, and potentially more we haven't yet identified. She stole over $100,000 when you account for the fraudulent credit cards, the improper liens, and the foreclosure on Ms. Brennan's property. She abused a position of trust and authority. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated pattern of criminal behavior that lasted for years. Brenda's attorney argued for leniency, citing her age, her lack of prior criminal history, and her cooperation once arrested. But when the judge spoke, her tone was severe. Ms. Patterson, you held a position of authority in your community. People trusted you to act in their best interests. Instead, you systematically victimized them for personal financial gain. You intercepted their mail, stole their identities, filed false liens, and in at least one case caused a family to lose their home. Your actions were calculating and cruel. While I've considered the arguments for leniency, I cannot ignore the severity and duration of your crimes. I'm sentencing you to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You'll also be required to pay full restitution to all identified victims, including interest and legal fees. That restitution totals $234,000. Brenda's face crumpled. She'd been expecting a lighter sentence, maybe even probation. 6 years was real time. Her attorney's shoulders sagged. As the marshals led Brenda out of the courtroom, she looked at me one last time. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a deep weariness and relief that it was finally over. Outside the courthouse, the victims gathered together. We'd formed an unexpected bond through this ordeal, a support group of sorts. We exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. "What are you going to do now?" Robert Torres asked me. "Live my life," I said. "Get back to normal. Maybe move eventually. Get away from Oakmont Hills and all the memories associated with it." But I didn't move. In the end, I decided to stay in my house at 842 Oakmont Drive. It was my home, and I refused to let what Brenda had done drive me away. The new HOA board was competent and reasonable. They implemented the reforms required by the settlement and actually started treating homeowners like valued community members rather than subjects to be controlled. My life slowly returned to normal. My credit score recovered. The fraudulent accounts were closed and removed from my record. I paid off my legal fees with the settlement money and put the rest into savings. I focused on my work, getting back into the rhythm of engineering projects and deadlines. But I never forgot what happened. I became active in HOA reform advocacy, working with a national organization that pushes for stronger homeowner protections and better oversight of HOA boards. I shared my story at community meetings and online forums, warning people about the potential for abuse and encouraging vigilance. A year after Brenda's sentencing, I testified again, this time before the Arizona State Legislature, supporting a bill that would require criminal background checks for HOA board members and mandatory training on fiduciary duties and legal obligations. The bill passed, and I was invited to the signing ceremony. Standing in the governor's office as she signed the law, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that my nightmare had led to something positive, that other homeowners might be spared what I went through. I still think about those 6 months when my mail was disappearing into a void, when my identity was being stolen piece by piece, when a lien was being built against my house without my knowledge. It's hard to describe the violation of it, the sense that your life is being hijacked and there's nothing you can do about it. But I also think about the people who helped me. Special Agent Reeves, who took my case seriously and pursued it with determination. Margaret Chen, who fought for me when I felt powerless. The other victims who came forward and shared their stories. The congressmen and state legislators who listened and acted. The system worked, eventually. Justice was served. But it shouldn't have been so hard. It shouldn't have required federal investigators and attorneys and congressional testimony. Homeowners should have better protections built into the system from the start. That's why I continue to speak out. That's why I share my story whenever someone will listen. Because for every case like mine that gets attention and results in justice, there are probably dozens more where the victims don't realize they're being victimized, or they don't have the resources to fight back, or they give up because the system seems too overwhelming. No one should have to call the feds just to protect their mail. No one should have to hire attorneys just to prevent their HOA from stealing their house. These things should be basic protections that exist automatically. My mail arrives reliably now at 842 Oakmont Drive. I check it every day, and it's always there in my mailbox where it belongs. It's such a simple thing, something most people never think about. But I never take it for granted anymore. Because I know what it's like when someone changes your address without permission, when your mail disappears for 6 months, when your entire life is thrown into chaos by someone who's supposed to be working for your benefit. I know what it's like to have to call the feds just to get your life back. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure other people don't have to go through the same thing.